Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Monday Q&As. Well, doing them on Sunday today, but let's knock this out anyways. First question. I'm using your linear hypertrophy program and add an isolation exercise. I'm doing in supersets, bicep curls, and shoulder flies. I think you mean side laterals. And face pulls and tricep rope pushdowns. Is this too much for the triceps in the long run? No, absolutely not. The point I've made on that particular program is that your accessory work and your weak point training needs to be individual. If you feel like your side and rear delts, biceps and triceps are your weak link, what you're doing is perfectly fine. Not only perfectly fine, it's preferred. You need to be hitting your weak links in the hypertrophy program with specific targeting exercises and in many cases direct isolation work for all your weak points. The program is not intended to be compound only. The base lifts are compound movements, yes, but you're expected to on this program to pick exercises to come in and do that. I mean, and if you're doing one tricep isolation exercise in there, even with all the pressing, it's not going to negatively affect your recovery. It should be perfectly fine. And again, if you feel like your arms and delts are the weak links for you in your overall size, and what you are doing is actually appropriate, and I approve of this, taking this course with the program. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I want to bulk up, but I don't actually have time to go to the gym. My question is that I want to put on a solid 15 to 20 pounds. How can I minimize fat gains as much as possible? This question is really absurd, and I'm only addressing it because people do say this sort of thing. Number one, you have time to go to the gym. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. You make choices as far as finding the way you want to gain muscle without actually lifting. It's not going to happen, at least not naturally. So if you bulk up and you gain 15 to 20 pounds, you won't be minimizing fat gains. You'll be maximizing fat gains. All that you will gain is fat. So if you're skinny, all you're going to do is become skinny fat with minimal to zero muscle gains if you bulk up, which is your prerogative. If you just feel you're too skinny, in general, do that, but it's unhealthy to just bulk up without any sort of training to actually gain muscle. It will be a negative change in body composition. You will gain primarily fat. That's it. You'll gain 15 to 20 pounds of fat. You might gain a half a pound of muscle in there, some extra water, but the overwhelming majority of it will be fat. There's no way around it. So you need to find time to get into the gym if you actually want to gain muscle, not just assume that bulking is going to get you there. It doesn't work that way. All right, next question. Hey Jason, how deep is too deep? Chuckle. Up until those points, I have been going as low as possible into the hole. Assuming you're talking about the squats. But now as the weight gets heavier, 185 pounds, I notice I get some forward lean if I go that deep. I tried to going on a perceived depth and maybe an inch or two below parallel, then forward lean is gone. Am I missing out on any benefits if I am not going as low as possible? If you're actually going as low as you claim you are, you've got video showing you are an inch or two below parallel, that's still fine. But in general, if you're getting extra forward lean by going really deep on the squat, you have some muscle imbalances and weaknesses. You need to either tighten up your technique, and most likely your core is too weak. You need to be doing a lot more work for your abs, your lower back, maybe your thoracic erectors. That is a muscle imbalance because you shouldn't have much forward lean going deep on the squat unless you are using a low bar squat. If you're using a proper high bar squat, which is what most non-power lifters are going to use for athletic purposes and gaining muscle, then there shouldn't be forward lean from going deeper. That's just a sign of a weak core or weak thoracic erectors. You need to address those weak points with specific exercises most likely, or keep focusing on your squat technique until the squat itself helps build them up. You've got a couple options there, but no, that is actually a sign of muscle weaknesses, and you need to address it. All right, next question. Best tips for getting a stronger bench. My bench max is significantly out of proportion with my squat and deadlift. A lot of people think it's out of proportion, but it isn't, so I'm going to assume in your case it really might be. I'm going to take your question at face value, but I see a lot of guys who, they'll bench 250 and squat 400 and pull 500 and think that they're out of proportion, and that's not. That's actually perfectly normal proportion if you balance them evenly in the amount of time that you give them. Now, assuming that it really is disproportionate, cut your squatting and deadlifting frequency back just slightly. Put extra emphasis on both your bench press and your overhead pressing. because that's generally, for most people who are starting out early on, it's usually weak delts that contribute the most. So if you do a lot more overhead pressing, that should help bring your bench press up. And again, putting the focus on the bench press itself and the overhead press is a larger emphasis in your program than your squat and deadlift for a little while should help resolve the issue. Again, assuming there really is an imbalance taking place. All right, next question. A question in regards to total volume. I squat 2 sets 3 days a week, and I notice my first set has normal linear progression in gaining reps. My second set, however, is all over the place, sometimes less or more than my previous workout's second set. Should I try to get both sets equal in reps by doing more volume, or should I focus on the first set's progression? You need to focus on both sets progression. There's a couple things that can cause your second set to be weaker. Number one, your first set actually is harder some workouts, meaning you've progressed on the first set, but in doing so, you've fatigued yourself more because you've put more weight on the bar or you've added reps and everything, and so it does take more out of you. You've had a higher RPE or rate of perceived exertion, and that rate of perceived exertion is taxing you more, so you're more fatigued when you get to the second set. It's the actual progression overall that maybe you've progressed as far as what you're doing, but you haven't adapted yet, so by adding the extra progression, you're more fatigued. The other factor is that a lot of guys are inconsistent with their rest times between each one. So you need to pin that down. Sometimes you might be resting 2 minutes, other times 5 minutes between that second set, and not being consistent in that is going to make the second set seem a lot more difficult and perform lower. So you need to be more consistent in what you're doing. So my recommendations are going to be along the line of, number one, make sure that maybe you're not trying to progress as hard and as much on the first set rather than your overall progression. So your goal should be smaller micro loading since you're trying to do it over more volume, instead of pushing the bleeding edge on the first set, so that you're not varying the amount of fatigue that you have after the first set a great deal when you get to the second one for your overall workload. And number two, be consistent in your rest times between them. If you're going to rest 3 minutes, then rest 3 minutes consistently. If you're going to rest 2 minutes, rest 2 minutes consistently. Don't create a larger gap in there that's going to cause inconsistency in the performance between the first and second rep if you're trying to keep up with that and actually utilize the second set for additional gains. So it's really more straightforward than it sounds. All right, next question. How to mix conditioning and strength training without sacrificing strength. Who you need to check out. I've interviewed him in the past. I have endorsed his book in the past, and as a coach that I endorse who specializes in this, rather than me just try to answer this in a very quick Q&A, let me just tell you to go check out Alex Viada. Alex Viada trains hybrid athletes. He competes as a hybrid athlete. Very successful coach. I consider him to be a friend, and I endorse his work. He also has a book called The Hybrid Athlete where he discusses large amounts of programming on how to cross-train for actual endurance sports and strength sports at the same time. And he is very, very good at this. I'm going to refer you to him. And remember, his name is Alex Viada with Complete Human Performance. All right, next question. Jason, been thinking of getting some lifting shoes for squats. I'm relatively tall, 6'3" with long legs. Do you think lifting shoes will help me hit more depth more comfortably? Do you wear them, and what would you recommend? Thanks. Yes, I do wear lifting shoes when I squat. I've actually quit squatting for a little while because I really want to focus on my deadlift as a main mass builder and not have to focus as much on the squat. So I haven't been squatting lately, but when I do squat, yes, I do use lifting shoes. I use Adidas Adipowers. I used to kind of be against guys using lifting shoes who struggle to hit depth, but due to a lot of people's various biomechanics, having messed with them, observed a lot of people who do utilize them, I have leaned in the direction over the years of saying squat shoes are probably a pretty decent investment, as long as it's not just sheer lack of mobility that's preventing you from doing it, but just your own biomechanics. I think squat shoes can be a valuable tool in helping you get deeper and get more hip and glute development. So yeah, I do endorse them. Look for any of the name brands. Nike, Adidas are both known for making really good weightlifting shoes, so go check those out. And I think there's also some called Do-Wins that are a little more inexpensive if you're on a tight budget. All right, next question. Natural estrogen blockers work or just bunk? I'm going to say they're bunk for the most part. Some of them might work a little bit, but it also comes down to the question of why are you trying to block your estrogen if you're not using anabolic steroids? You shouldn't be worried about manipulating your hormones and lowering estrogen in any way unless you need to as a result of side effects from using steroids, testosterone, etc. in hefty doses. Because estrogen itself is important for men's health. It is important for your lipid profile, for your bone density, and even for your muscle gain. So it's not something you should be trying to lower unless it's medically elevated outside the normal range. And if it is, there are pharmaceutical drugs for that can be found cheaply that are much better choices. And so, yeah, trying to manipulate your estrogen when you really don't need to be doing so is a bad idea. And again, it's generally only going to be high enough that you need to mess with it if you're already using a synthetic drug. And that's one of the side effects of it, in which case messing with a natural remedy to deal with the side effects of a pharmaceutical is kind of ass backwards. There are pharmaceuticals that help do this. So no, I see this as a waste of time, and if it really does work, it's potentially dangerous, because if guys are just completely natural trying to lower their estrogen, they're actually hurting their gains, they're hurting their health by doing so. All right. The next couple questions are going to be more gear related, so if you're not interested in that, you guys can go ahead and tune out. The week is over for you guys, but let's jump into them. Hey Jason, why do people who use gear train one body part a week? From my understanding, steroids help people recover faster, so wouldn't people on gear benefit from a training split that is also best suitable for natural lifter, like one body part 2 to 3 times a week? All right, I hate it when people try to draw this fine line of this is what happens for natties and this is what happens for enhanced guys, because the actual variation is massive of all the gray areas in between after someone crosses a not natty line. What people need to understand is that, and I try to repeat this over and over, there's a massive variation in how enhanced people are. And so people say, well, this guy's on drugs, he should be able to do this. Not necessarily. A guy who uses low doses of drugs doesn't get all of the benefits that, say, the amount of drugs an IFBB pro or an NPC bodybuilder uses. They use astronomical amounts of drugs in large stacks and combinations that the more casual enhanced guy doesn't use, and the difference is vast. Like a guy who just uses 400 or 500 milligrams of testosterone a week is going to be closer in terms of the way his body recovers, responds, how his muscle protein synthesis is. He's going to be closer to someone who's drug free than he's going to be to someone who uses an IFBB pro type stack. The difference is going to be dramatic between him and the guys using large combinations and cocktails of drugs in high doses. So that's something you need to consider. But as a general rule, what you find, there's a sliding scale. The more enhanced you are, the less you benefit from additional frequency. And it's not because it doesn't give neural gains. Yeah, it will help with the neural gain side. If you're trying to get as strong as possible, higher frequency is very much a benefit from a neural efficiency perspective. But you start losing the benefits of the muscle protein synthesis uptime, because the more drugs you go on, the longer you can sustain a muscle protein synthesis uptime as a result of lifting, and in some cases even without lifting. So you're losing a lot of the benefits of the frequency. I'm not saying they're not there, but they're dramatically diminished as the level of enhancement goes up. So the truth is they gain less and less from the higher frequency the more drugs that they're on. But by that same token, again, a natural lifter gains less and less. The more volume he adds, he gets massively diminished returns from adding volume. He's doubling his volume. A natural lifter might only get a 3% increase in actual growth stimulation from it, or 2%. So they get less from the volume and more from the frequency, whereas in the other direction, the largely enhanced lifter gets the other. And remember, that's the whole point of why guys on large amounts of drugs can do low frequency, high volume and get massive, because the hypertrophy end, they just don't really get any benefits from the frequency because they don't need to respark their muscle protein synthesis with other workouts. It's already elevated for up to a week at a time from just one brutal high volume workout. And so doing additional work may not actually stimulate any additional growth through the elevated muscle protein synthesis, or only get additional neural gains from it. So they might get slightly stronger on their lower rep work. So again, that's kind of why it's gone in that direction. Now you're talking about pure strength athletes. When we go on drugs, we can talk about very high frequencies and Bulgarian type training. But for just gains themselves, no, not really. All right, next question and last question of the week. Would donating plasma while on a steroid or prohormone cycle give you less gains than if you didn't, because you'd be losing the extra hormones you're putting in when they take your plasma? All right. This shows a very strong ignorance of how these substances work in the bloodstream, because what you need to understand is that at any given moment, when someone is on some sort of anabolic drug, let's say they're taking something that they inject once a week and it stays in their system for 2 to 3 weeks and tapers down, each release of it that you have as the hormone is coming out is only in your bloodstream a few seconds. So what that means is that at any given time, there's very possibly less than 1/1,000,000th of the total substance that you put into your body actually floating in your bloodstream. Less than 1/1,000,000th. And you're not even taking all of your blood. You're taking a very small amount, like 1 pint. So in many cases, that pint of the blood will contain less than 100th of a million, or even sometimes less than 1/1000,000th, 1/1000,000th of the total amount of substance that was injected in the body. So no, you're not losing any appreciable amount. And the truth is, even the amount in the actual blood wouldn't be enough for anyone to notice a spike in their blood levels, to test positive for the drug or whatever from a blood transfusion. It's so minuscule that it is completely irrelevant. So no, this is not something that someone needs to be concerned with, and normally I wouldn't address this other than people need to understand that when you're dealing with these anabolic substances or any drug whatsoever that has a long-term effect over time, like any sort of injectable depot, that very, very little of that substance, only a microscopic amount, less than 1/1,000,000th of it, is actually in your bloodstream at any given second or moment. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.